Hello everyone, welcome again to the channel. Today I want to share with you my opinion about this story and some background information for you who don't know this person. So apparently on July 24th, 2022, the grave of Stepan Bandera was desecrated in Munich. So here we see some photos. Says in Munich, vandals desecrated the grave of Stepan Bandera, the leader of the OUN and one of the ideologists of Ukrainian nationalism. So these are different angles of the grave. This is where it was his name. Okay, so that's the start. So let's find out who this guy was. So the first story we're going to check is this one from DW. This is a German-based website, and this article is I think 22, yes, it's 22 of May 2022, so that's from this year. And they say Stepan Bandera, Ukrainian hero or Nazi collaborators. The Mariupol fighters revere him, Russian soldiers hunt his supporters. The myth surrounding Ukrainian nationalist Stepan Bandera is at the heart of Russia's assault on Ukraine. Who was he? Now you see the photo of the guy and some other things. So there's a lot of information to go through, so I'm just going to highlight a few things that are relevant. This is one soldier of the infamous Azov battalion, and this story is the information that they provide here is supported by information from these two persons, Andreas Umland and Gregor's Rosalin-Kiliv, which are, this one is a biographer, Gregor's Rosalin-Kiliv, Bandera biographer and historian at the Free University of Berlin. And Andreas Umland is an expert at the Stockholm Center for Eastern European Studies. Okay, so what are they telling us? And the author of this article, his name is Roman Goncharenko. Okay, so now we know the basic details, and we know that he was revered, or he is revered still for a lot of people in Ukraine who identify themselves as nationalists, Ukrainian nationalists. Even people from the politicians in Ukraine, they still revere him. So this is widespread in modern day Ukraine. And it was especially noticeable with the Azov people, with the Azov battalion, Azov regiment. So basically they say that for a lot of people in Ukraine, Stepan Bandera is a hero, and he's a hero mostly for people in the western part of Ukraine, the area where is Ivano-Frankivsk and Lvov. So that's kind of the background, geographical background we will see later. So he was the leader of this group that it was called the OUN, and they are saying that the group was split in two groups, and Bandera became the leader of the more radical wing, the OUNB. And that was while Germany was preparing for the attack on the Soviet Union, they joined the German leadership with two Ukrainian battalions, and these were the name of the battalions were named Nightingale and Roland. So these were the battalions that they were part of. Okay. So they are saying, I will go through some of the details in the other article, so let's try to see what these guys are doing. They say Bandera lived in Munich until he was killed in 1959. So that's why the grave was in Munich, that's where he died, right? Okay, so I'm trying to give everyone some context. And what happened was, first one was this president. His name was Viktor Yushchenko. He was president in 2005, and he declared that Stepan Bandera was the hero of Ukraine. And later, another president, Viktor Yanukovych, removed the title. Okay, so even the presidents of Ukraine didn't agree on what was the reality of this guy for different reasons. So we will go into that. So these guys say, Unland and Rosolinsky, they say that the involvement of OUN fighters in the murders of civilians, Jews and Poles in the regions of Galicia and Bohemia, it was the groups that Stepan Bandera was the leader, the group of the OUN, and Galicia and Bohemia is the names of the regions of the westernmost part of Ukraine. So the regions where it is Lvov and Ivano-Frankivsk, that is the region of Galicia, and in the north of that it is Bohemia. Both of these regions were previously part of Poland, to give you some historical context. And these guys say this, which is the start of the apology these guys do for Stepan Bandera. They say, however, they said Bandera personally had no part in the murders. So that is a very bold statement to make. What do they mean by he personally had no part in the murders? He was a leader. Of course, he didn't go personally and do it and did it. Or maybe he did. I have no indications of that, but he was a leader. I think this is the same as saying that Adolf Hitler personally had no part in the murders of all the people that died during the Holocaust. That is not exculpating him. He was the leader, so he's responsible for the actions of the people that he was a leader of, and he set the policies and the philosophy of the group, so he was responsible. But pay attention to the fact that this is article from 2022, so this is why they are exculpating him. They say that this guy Rosolinsky, he had found no evidence that Bandera supported or condemned ethnic cleansing or killing Jews and other minorities. Okay, so he found no evidence of that. We will see that there is enough evidence. He says Bandera was not a Nazi, but a Ukrainian ultra-nationalist. Not only nationalist, ultra-nationalist. See? He says Bandera can be called a radical nationalist, a fascist. It doesn't seem very positive. Okay, so this is the statue of this guy Bandera in the region of Volhynia. So pay attention to this because we will come back to this later. So they are basically saying he was not involved. Alright? And now we will go to this second article. This article is much older. I think this one is from 2005. I might be wrong. He says, yes, they are talking about Norman G.W. Gouda, which was the author of this article. They are talking about some books that he published in 2007 and 2005. However, I don't see a specific date on this article. Okay, but for example, the latest comments are from about 8 years ago. There are comments as old as 2010. Okay, so probably based on the fact that most of the comments are from 2010 because they don't specify, we can assume that the article is has been online at least since 2010. So it's roughly 12 years. That was before the Maidan, Euromaidan, the posing of the Ukrainian president Yanukovych. Okay, so they are referring again to this story that they say on January 2010, Ukrainian President Viktor Yushchenko honored Stepan Bandera by posthumously bestowing on him the state honor Hero of Ukraine. There is a lot of information, so I'm just going to highlight a few things. So if you are interested, I'm going to include the links to all these articles if you're interested in reading further. So they are saying he was the uncompromising leader of the militant terrorist branch of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, or OUN. Bandera became a Nazi collaborator. Okay? Bandera, his deputies, and the Nazis shared a key obsession, namely the notion that the Jews in Ukraine were behind communism and Stalinist imperialism and must be destroyed. They said the Jews of the Soviet Union are the most loyal supporters of the Bolshevik regime and vanguard of the Muscovite imperialism in the Ukraine, and they helped to launch a pogrom that killed 4,000 Lvov Jews in a few days, using weapons ranging from guns to metal poles. We will lay your heads at Hitler's feet. That's what they were saying, you know. And they say the Banderists never disagreed with their Jewish policy in Ukraine. So all the group was agreeing on this, you know, which eventually killed 1.5 million Ukrainian Jews. And Poles, I don't know, I didn't see a specific information about how many Poles they killed. Then we will see why they killed the Poles. In his book Erase from 2007, Omar Bartov discusses the large bronze statue of Bandera that stands in a park in the East Galician town of Drohobych. most of whose 15,000 Jews were murdered. So they say the park stands on the site of the town's former Jewish ghetto, but there is not so much as a plaque in the park to memorialize the Jewish dead. These and other examples like it make a condemnation of Yushchenko's step necessary. Okay, so remember the statue? This is the statue that they refer to. So this is the statue on the town of Drohobych. So there, in this town where they have this statue honoring him, they kill 15,000 Jews. So let's continue. They say Ukrainian sources confirm that fighting people in the homeland were not prepared to accept Bandera as a dictator, and that Bandera's program was unacceptable to the resistance movement inside Ukraine. In 1952, Bandera temporarily resigned as head of the OUN, pressured by the growing opposition to his leadership among top-ranking nationalist leaders who opposed him on the grounds of his totalitarian tactics. So this was 1952, after the war ended. He was already living outside of Ukraine. And they say because Bandera effectively promoted his own legend and because the Soviets were behind his death, emigres who did not know any better labeled him as the martyr leader of Ukrainians abroad. Those who label him a hero today, in other words, are as foolish as they are offensive. That's the essence of this article. It says a lot of more things, and then I found this article, which is the one that is more extensive. The name of the article is Hitler's Shadow. I will provide a link to all this. And it's very interesting reading. You will see a lot of information, and then you will see how all this ties together. So there's an entire article on this paper that is telling us about involvement of the Ukrainian with the German army. Okay, so this is chapter 5, collaborators, allied intelligence and the organization of Ukrainian nationalists. So let's see how all this started. As you know, Bandera, he was the leader of the OUNB, and so this is the story. He was there when the Nazis arrived, and the main goal of his group, it was that they wanted to have an independent Ukraine, and they wanted to have ethnically clean Ukraine. So from his point of view, he wanted to cleanse Ukraine from Jews and from Poles. This was for several reasons, but one of the reasons was a very practical reason. They wanted to eliminate all the Poles because if it came the point where the independence of Ukraine was at stake, they could always say that this piece of Galicia and Volhynia will not go back to Poland because they already eliminated all the Poles. So that's why they were killing all the people from Poland, because they didn't want this region to go back to Poland politically. So they didn't want Poland to have an excuse to say, okay, Polish citizens are living in this area, so they wanted to kill all of them. The reason why they killed as many Jews as they wanted is because they thought that they were collaborating with the Soviet Union at the moment, and they wanted to be independent. And like they say, he was a fascist. He wanted to be the dictator of Ukraine. So he wanted an independent Ukraine with him as the leader. So that was his main thing. And then he fought with the Nazis. They collaborated together with his group, and they took over some rival groups. They murdered the leaders, and they continued to operate all together. And what happened was that his group declared the independence of Ukraine while the Second World War was still going. And the Germans didn't like this idea, so they told him that he should stop that. And he refused. So after that, they arrested him and he went to Germany. So he was there for some time, and all this time, from his arrest to the start of hostilities, they were, murdering people all over Ukraine. They were murdering collaborators who were Ukrainian citizens that had nothing. They were not either Jews or Polish, and they were also killing entire villages of people that were deemed to be collaborators. So that's how they were operating, and they were known to be very, very cruel. Even by German standards, they were very cruel. And so what happened was that after he was put in prison, then the war continued, but his group continued to work together with Germany, and he had some associates that worked together with him. So it was not only him; it was at least 3 main guys that were working together with him. And after the end of the war, they continued to work, let's say, in the exile. So they still wanted to have an independent Ukraine, and of course at that time Ukraine was already part of the Soviet Union. So they continued to work with MI6, with British intelligence for a long time, to undermine the Soviet Union in different ways. And they were working also with the CIA. But Stepan Bandera himself, according to some declarations from the CIA, they didn't want to work with him because of his reputation. So instead of working with him, we're working with some other guys that were part of the same group. And that was the main thing. After some time, the Soviet Union infiltrated some group where he was working, some security service in Germany, and that's when they finally killed him. So that's what happened in a summary. But several countries were supporting him in this counterinsurgency, in these terrorist attacks, and all these things that they were doing, including Italy, Germany, United States, of course, and the United Kingdom. So they were all together helping all these ultranationalists, who were basically Nazis. They were helping them, and they continue to help them for so many years, even until today. So they never stopped helping Nazis because they wanted to fight the Soviet Union, and after the Soviet Union disintegrated, they continued to fight the current day Russia. So that's the summary of the story, and I will go and highlight some points that are important for people to know. So he was working with this guy Stetsko. He's one of the collaborators of Bandera. And while he was under house arrest, he says, "I fully appreciate the undeniably harmful and hostile role of the Jews who are helping Moscow to enslave Ukraine. I therefore support the destruction of the Jews and the expedience of bringing German methods of extermination Jewry to Ukraine." So that's him saying that he was in favor of exterminating Jews. No? So remember that all these guys were associates of Stepan Bandera, so they worked together. Okay. Then in Lvov, they found a leaflet, and they say they are talking to Jews. They say, "You welcome Stalin with flowers. When the Soviets occupied East Galicia in 1939, we will lay your heads at Hitler's feet." So this is the complete sentence. You welcome Stalin with flowers, we will lay your heads at Hitler's feet. And later in 1941, in a meeting in Lvov, they said that Jews have to be treated harshly. We must finish them off. regarding the Jews, we will adopt any methods that lead to their destruction. And of course they did these operations that are called pogroms in East Galicia, and in the first days of the war they killed at least 12,000 Jews. And then Stetko went to and report all of these to Bandera. See? So he went to Berlin and he reported all these. So Bandera was aware of this. So it was not like he was an innocent character in all this story, Stetko was working with him. And they say Banderist guerrillas in western Ukraine often kill Jews. Historian Yehuda Bauer writes that Banderists kill all the Jews they could find, surely many thousands in all. There is even a story, they say Moshe Maltz, a Jew hiding in Sokal, heard from a friendly Polish contact about 40 Jews were hiding out in the woods near his home. The Bandera gangs came and murdered them all. So that's what they were doing. And then when the Soviets reconquered East Galicia, this is November 1944, Maltz recorded that when Bandera gangs seize a Jew, they consider it a prize catch. The ordinary Ukrainians feel the same way. They all want to participate in the heroic act of killing a Jew. They literally slash Jews to pieces with their machetes. And then we have this other guy that was working with him also, the Levet. He proposed in April to cleanse the entire revolutionary territory of the Polish population. So they wanted to remove everyone who was not ethnically Ukrainian from this region. And they were working with this other group that was called the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, which they killed their leaders and they worked together. And they say, Maltz says that Bandera men are not discriminating about who they kill, they are gunning down the populations of entire villages. Since there are hardly any Jews left to kill, the Bandera gangs have turned on the Poles. They're literally hacking Poles to pieces every day. You can see the bodies of Poles with wires around their necks floating down the river Bug. On a single day, July 11, 1943, the UPA attacked some 80 localities, killing perhaps 10,000 Poles. Imagine that. And of course, they were doing guerrilla warfare against the Soviets as well, but that was probably normal insurgency, nothing special about that. By 1947, some 250,000 Ukrainians were living as displaced persons in Germany, Austria, and Italy. Many of them OUN activists or sympathizers. So I wonder, all these million people that are left in Ukraine, left Ukraine, and now they're living in Europe. So the story is repeating itself. A lot of these sympathizers of this ideology are again infecting Europe, infecting the entire world, So history really repeats itself. Let's find some more highlights about this. Okay, so in November 1947, this was after the war ended, the Soviet military authorities in Berlin insisted that UPA members in the USSR be handed over. But this is the United States. The officer from the CIC recommended against it. Extradition of the UPA partisans, said one, could destroy for years the confidence anti-Bolshevist forces have in the USA. So you understand what they're saying? What they're saying is that they didn't want to give people from the UPA back to the Soviets because they didn't want people to know what they did. They didn't want the reputation of Ukrainians. They didn't want to know that the reputations of the US, that they were helping them. They didn't want people to know that the US was involved in all of this, And this is the story about the British intelligence, the MI6. So pay attention to this, because I already made a video about this particular thing, so it's not nothing new, but this is actually from 1948. So it is something that they didn't stop. They were trying to find people that were living in the Caucasus and Turkestan region. So they are referring to Chechnya. Remember Chechnya? They were recruiting Soviet Muslims from Central Asia for use against the Soviet Union. And they did it again. They did it again soon after the Soviet Union disintegrated. They did it again. They supported again the same groups to rise against the newly formed Russia. And they're doing it again. If you saw this new video that I just recently produced a couple of days ago, they are again messing around with the people in this region, with the Chechens, to fight against Russia. So they never stop. They have been doing this for more than 50 years. 60 years, almost 70 years they have been doing this. Imagine that, It's actually more than that. Imagine 70 years trying to fight against the Soviet Union, then they changed the name, now it's Russia. They never stop, British intelligence and the CIA, they never changed their tactics, they never changed their ideologies, always supporting radical groups, whether there are Muslim radicals or Nazi collaborators or ultranationalists, however they want to call it. They are always doing the same. It is never changed, and it will never change. This is the people that are the leaders of the West. So that's what you're looking at. By 1949, MI6 began helping Bandera. And in 1950, MI6 began training agents that were part of his group. They say British officials consider the possibility and desirability of engaging in clandestine operations in the Soviet Union. Bandera, the American said, had lost touch with feelings in the Ukraine, particularly in the former Polish territories, where the Soviet government had been successful to a remarkable degree in transforming the mentality of the younger generation. So you understand what they're saying? They're saying that after the Soviet army liberated the Ukraine from the German occupation, they were successful in changing the mentality of people against this ultranationalism. But that didn't stop. They didn't stop because they continued to support these ultranationalists. The MI6 and the CIA continued. Even if the Soviet Union eradicated these ideologies from the territories, they continue to harbor it, United States and the United Kingdom. And it was the opinion of the CIA that Bandera was not very effective, that he didn't have really a lot of very useful contacts. So that's why they weren't working with him, and because they didn't like his background, his story, his history. So Bandera was, according to his handlers, a professional underground worker with a terrorist background and ruthless notions about the rules of the game. A bandit type, if you like, with a burning patriotism which provides an ethical background and a justification for his banditry, no better and no worse than others of his kind. So you see what was the opinion? Even they thought he was some kind of bandit and a terrorist. But he was a useful terrorist and a useful bandit for them, so they didn't complain too much about him. Okay, so while Bandera was in Munich, he was recruiting people, and he says he published a newspaper that spewed anti-American rhetoric and used loyal thugs to attack other Ukrainian émigré newspapers and to terrorize political opponents in the Ukrainian emigration. He attempted to penetrate US military and intelligence offices in Europe and to intimidate Ukrainians working for the United States. So he was against everyone that was not with him. That's what he was, And the United States and British intelligence, they were kind of worried that they didn't want the Soviets to kill him or to kidnap him, because they say under no circumstances must Bandera be allowed to become a martyr. So they didn't want him to be a hero after death, And here they say that Italian military intelligence were working with him. Also, the German intelligence were working with him. And even the Bavarian state government and Munich police wanted to crack down on Bandera's organization for crimes ranging from counterfeiting to kidnapping. So that's what they were doing, to get money, all kinds of things they were doing. And let's see some more things here. Okay. So Levet, which was one of the guys that was working with him, he was a well-known sadist and collaborator of the German, according to the United States. Levet sanitized his wartime record and that of the Bandera Group and the UPA with a 126-page book on the latter, which emphasized their fight against the Germans and Soviets. So even they knew that they didn't have a very good reputation, but they wanted to change the history. So the CIA provided supplies, money, training facilities for radio broadcasts and parachute drops of trained agents. So they were doing all these things, and they were doing it as part of an operation that was called, first it was called Cartel, and then it was changed to Aerodynamic. And what they were saying about Bandera, I think it was about Levet. They say his identification in New York by other Ukrainians as a leader responsible for wholesale murders of Ukrainians, Poles, and Jewish has been discussed elsewhere. So what was the CIA doing? The CIA was providing all these opportunities for propaganda aimed to Ukraine. So they were doing all these radio broadcasts and all these things, and they were supporting the groups with training. And they were talking about Levet and Bandera. They say neither party, said one CIA official while comparing Bandera and Levet, is lily white. So this has a lot of detail about this. So it's a very interesting article. You should read it if you're interested in all this. So in 1953, this operation that was called Aerodynamic began to operate through a Ukrainian study group under Levet's leadership in New York under CIA auspices, which collected Ukrainian literature and story and produced Ukrainian nationalist newspapers, bulletins, radio programming, and books for distribution in the Ukraine. So they continued to promote Ukrainian nationalism, even if they knew what was the background, that they were part of the Nazi operations in Ukraine. The Nazi operations, they were killing Jews, they were killing Polish people, Ukrainians themselves. So this is who is the USA, the USA, the CIA, these groups, they never changed their tactics. They continue to do it, even to this day. Beginning in 1955, leaflets were dropped over the Ukraine by air, and radio broadcasts titled Nova Ukraina were aired in Athens for Ukrainian consumption. So they were broadcasting from Greece so that people in Ukraine would listen to in the radio, to their programs, to the information they wanted to give them, to the propaganda, so poisoning the mind of people with their ideas. And these activities encouraged Ukrainian nationalism, strengthened Ukrainian resistance, and provided an alternative to Soviet media. So this is the same. They were doing that back then with propaganda in radio. Now they're doing it with the internet. So only the media changed, but their tactics never changed. So some people question why Russia is forbidding all these media sources, because that's what they do. They do propaganda, and they didn't stop, and they even recognize it. They say some form of nationalist feeling continues to exist in the Ukraine, and there is an obligation to support it as a Cold War weapon. So they were doing this for all the time that the Cold War lasted and beyond. They say even Levitt overtly distanced himself and the Ukrainian nationalist movement from the overt anti-Semitism of his boundaries days. So they were even later collaborating with some Jews. So whoever was able for their means, they were even collaborating with some expat groups of Jews from the Soviet Union, and they were using them for their own agenda, So they say former boundaries, in other words, now attack the Soviets for anti-Semitism rather than with it. So now they were claiming that the Soviets were anti-Jews. So that was the main thing. So then this operation changed later, and it was changed from aerodynamic, later became QR dynamic, later PD dynamic, and later QR plump. This was part of this group that was also called Prologue. So they were all working together. They were all so different groups of the CIA, and they later dismissed this program officially in 1990, but probably they just changed the name and continued working under a different name. In June 1985, the General Accounting Office mentioned Levitt's name in a public report on Nazis and collaborators who settled in the United States with help from the US intelligence agencies. That is June 1985. The Office of Special Investigations, OSI, in the Department of Justice began investigating Levitt that year. But the CIA shielded Levitt by denying any connection between Levitt and the Nazis and by arguing that he was a Ukrainian freedom fighter. As late as 1991, the CIA tried to dissuade OSI from approaching the German, Polish, and Soviet governments for war-related records related to the OUN. So they hide everything. That's what they were doing. So that's the reality of who this guy was. And there's ample evidence, so they continue to refuse the reality. People don't want to see who he was, so there is the evidence. So that's all I wanted to say. It was a long video. I hope that it was interesting. There is a lot of information to digest. You can read all the articles in this totality. So let me know what you guys think about it. And as always, I ask you to remember about the opportunity to support my work. I include in the description of each video opportunities for different platforms you can use to support me with donations. You can also support my work by liking this video, sharing it in social media, and subscribing to the channel. I hope to see you again very soon. Thank you for watching.